Our next guest is someone who's known to all of you, I'm sure, Bill Muehlenberg. He's a stalwart of the pro-life movement around Melbourne. Bill was born in America, and how long have you lived here in Melbourne, Bill?
33 years.
33 years. Bill was married to a lovely Australian woman named Avril, who sadly passed away just in the last couple of years. And Bill has 3 sons. He has qualifications in philosophy and theology, and he's been part of several pro-life and pro-family organisations over the years. Since 2006, Bill has run a popular website called CultureWatch, where he's written thousands of articles. He's appeared on all major television and radio news shows, current affairs shows, debate programs, and he's widely sought out by the media for comments on social issues, faith issues, and family issues. And Bill has authored several books on life issues and homosexuality. And in fact, a homosexual activist once threatened to make an anti-discrimination complaint against me just for having Bill on my website. Today, Bill is going to speak about his experience doing pro-life work in the US and also on eugenics and specifically Margaret Sanger and the beginnings of Planned Parenthood. So thank you, Bill.
Sit on the chair.
We'll just put the lights off so that you can see the screen.
Thank you very much indeed for coming out and play with a few things here. Thank you for inviting me, Kathy. It's important to share together on these key issues, and so I'm glad to be a part of it. One interesting juxtaposition, if you will. I'm enjoying looking at probably one of the world's nicest, biggest, plainest, whitest walls ever. What a great wall, right? But for some reason we have a fairly small screen, so I have to apologize. Those in the back, if it's hard to see or read, if there's any seats up front, you might move up, but otherwise, apologies, it's kind of a smallish screen. And the cord is not too long, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to sit by the laptop, but you don't need to see me, that's all right. But you should try to see the screen, so we'll see how we go. But as we heard, we'll look a bit at the issue of eugenics and the attack on life. Hopefully 35 minutes we'll make it through, and a few Q&A at the end if you're up for them. As you probably know, most of you would be familiar with the topic. Eugenics, of course, simply means good birth or well-born. Some of these pictures are actual pictures, either Margaret Sanger or Planned Parenthood or other groups would have used over the years. So again, hard to read from in the back, but talking about creating a healthy and a kind of a master race, which should sound familiar. The phrase itself was coined back in 1833. Galton was an interesting character, believed that blacks were genetically inferior, the Jews were parasites, and that poverty was actually transmitted by the genes. Of interest, he was a cousin of Charles Darwin, who you all know about. His book, 1859, we all know at least the first bit of the title, right? On the origin of the species, but many perhaps do not know the rest of the title. By means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life. Now that book, as you probably know, was all about the animal kingdom. However, he followed it up a decade or so later, applying everything he had said there to human beings, to you and me, in the descent of man. Again, you may not be able to see this, but some typical quotes: with savages, the weak in body or mind are soon eliminated, and those that survive commonly exhibit a vigorous state of health. We civilized men, on the other hand, do not do our utmost to check the process of elimination. We build asylums for the imbecile, the maimed, the sick, and so on. Interesting, in the light of everything we've been through the last few years, even talks about vaccination and so on, and how, again, we can weed out those who are infirm or weak or probably not going to live long. Goes on to say, thus weak members of civilized society propagate their kind. No one who has attended to the breeding of domestic animals will doubt that this must be highly injurious to the race of man. So again, going on to talk about how we breed out the worst in the animal kingdom. Nothing wrong at all with doing it in the human species as well. Of interest, his son, Leonard Darwin, was secretary of the British Eugenics Society, and they were concerned about the feeble-minded having too many children. Plenty of others were quite favorable to this whole mindset back then. Herbert Spencer, philosopher, social Darwinist. He's the one who actually coined the phrase survival of the fittest. He said the whole effort of nature is to get rid of the unfit to make room for the better. If they are not sufficiently complete to live, they die, and it is best that they should die. So again, some of the leading figures, intellects, minds of the day were all pushing this eugenics position. Plenty of good books, of course, have been written to critique this. One good one, From Darwin to Hitler, by Richard Weikart. He talked about how really what we saw in Germany in the 30s and 40s directly sprang from the worldview of Darwin, the eugenicists, and others. There's a real connection indeed. He says, Darwinism by itself did not bring about the Holocaust, but without Darwinism, neither Hitler nor the Nazi followers would have had the necessary scientific underpinnings to convince themselves and their collaborators that one of the world's greatest atrocities was really morally praiseworthy. So a very good book indeed, if you want to get that one. Another disciple of Galton was Pearson. He said blacks were, again, genetically inferior. He said the British were on the top of the great chain of being. Going down further from the Europeans were Chinese and blacks and so on. And he spoke of the need to sterilize whole communities to, again, weed out these inferior races. The first Congress of Eugenics held in London, 1912. Others soon followed. The call was made at one of these to sterilize 14 million Americans with low intelligence test scores. And again, presidents, university heads, politicians, important people came to attend these conferences. A lot of American groups sprang up during this time. The American Breeders Association, pushing things like euthanasia and sterilization of the unfit. To multiply the genetically desired bloodlines, they suggested polygamy and systematic mating. Other draconian remedies were proposed, such as having a germplasm introduced to restrict marriage, to weed out those who weren't up to speed. birth control being compulsory, forced segregation for life, and so on. Pretty radical stuff. Margaret Sanger, that you know all about, of course, was a leading eugenicist of the day. She was the founder of Planned Parenthood. You know all about Planned Parenthood, the world's biggest and nastiest abortion outfit in the world. She was a keen supporter of sex education, birth control, abortion, and her values are still in vogue today around the world. New York gal, feminist, radical politics, believed in free sex while at college, married a wealthy socialist so she could push her agenda, influenced by the book by Havelock Ellis, Studies in the Psychology of Sex. He was another proponent of free love in every kind of sexual deviancy. He was later one of her many lovers. Birth Control Review came out early on. Its slogan, birth control, to create a race of thoroughbreds. 1922 book, The Pivot of Civilization. She talked about eliminating human weeds for the cessation of charity. What a waste of time having charitable groups. Segregating morons, misfits, the maladjusted, and so on. The most merciful thing you can do, she said, is for those with large families, is to kill infants. The handicapped, blind, deaf, dumb, mute, epileptics, there are dead weight of human waste. So pretty hardcore stuff here. Such a true radical is the eugenicist. His vision is a voluntary control of the quality of future humanity. He would purge the world of imbeciles, just like we purge the world of animals, and we see this today in the eugenics movement as well. 1969, not all that long ago, Frederick Jaffe, vice president of Planned Parenthood, had a list of 33 measures, including putting agents in the water supply, increase homosexuality, have permits for children, compulsory sterilization, abortion, forget about home ownership. By the way, if you're familiar with the World Economic Fellowship, Klaus Schwab, right, the Davos annual meetings in Switzerland, these are all the very things they, in their very influential meetings, are proposing as well. Another group, CICUS, Mary Calderon, said we have yet to beat the drum for birth control in the way we beat the drum for the polio vaccine. So again, using medicine to push for a superior race, again, not from long ago, but people alive today that you all know of. Here we have Hillary Clinton, right? Who still might even run again for president, being given the Margaret Sanger Award from Planned Parenthood. She said it was a great privilege. I admire Sanger enormously, her courage, tenacity, her vision. I really am in awe of her. So if you wonder about people like Hillary and Bill Clinton, or now we have Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, this is their worldview, this is their mindset, this is where they're at, and this is why, if you're not already doing it, you should be praying every day for the U.S. election results, right? Coming up in about 61 days. Debate will be held on Wednesday. It'll be bad news indeed if Kamala gets in. Trump has been a bit iffy and back and forth, yes, on things like the pro-life issue, but compared to Kamala and Tim Walz, light years difference. So you really got to pray for what happens there, because as you know, what happens in America tends to filter down and happen in Australia and elsewhere. So Marie Stopes we'll hear about more shortly, but the UK equivalent of Sanger even have postage stamps honoring her in Britain. 1919 urged the National Birthright Commission to again push for mandatory sterilization, anyone diseased or drunk and so on. 1920, sterilization of those who were unfit for parenthood and so on. She even sent a poem to Adolf Hitler. 1939, Dear Herr Hitler, love is the greatest thing in the world. So will you accept from me these poems, that you may allow the young people of your nation to have them? You can see pretty clearly where these people are at and the connections they had. Today, some 500 centers in 40 countries doing about 500,000 sterilizations a year, like Planned Parenthood, a major abortion provider. So we've already hinted at the connection, right, from what only happened 80, 90 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. The most civilized, educated, cultured nation on earth unleashed in the 1930s what became the most, one of the most horrible episodes in human history. And again, there's a connection between what Hitler and the Nazis believed and where these early eugenicists were coming from. Again, doctors, scientists in Germany in the 30s, even in the 20s, were pushing all this. So they even created the term racial hygiene, looking at how if you study heredity, you can again create a superior German race. Famous book 1920 on the authorization of the destruction of life, unworthy of life. A very influential book, again, by doctors, scientists, leading up to the Holocaust, to Hitler, and pushing, again, the euthanasia and abortion wars of even today. So, not just euthanasia, there were sterilization programs in Germany. Some 400,000 Germans, all up, were forcibly sterilized. American eugenicists, such as Rockefeller, were fully cheering this on, financing it. 1925, Hitler said the demand that defective people be prevented from propagating equally defective offspring is a demand of the clearest reason, and if systematically executed, represents the most humane act of mankind. Again, Sparta must be regarded as the first nationalist state. There, they allowed children who were sick, deformed, to die of exposure. It was one of the most decent and truthful things that we could do. This is his mindset. And of course, as we say, a lot of businesses, corporations, politicians, governments were actually supporting these programs. There were Americans and others actually training and supporting and funding some of these outfits, including at the concentration camps. American eugenics groups were involved with all this, even American presidents, as you can see. Some of the stuff which later became IBM, some of those people were actually involved in some of these things going on at the concentration camps. Of course, of more concern, not just the obvious suspects, but how many Christians, right, became supportive of this whole agenda. Far too many, just as today, as we already heard, Christians involved too. Another important book, Harold O.J. Brown on euthanasia. This was a piece he wrote in '87. The sad fact that many German Christians allowed themselves to be swept along with the euthanasia movement, including the genocide of the Jews. They didn't speak out, and if they did, it was too late. Faced with the double argument that such euthanasia was scientific and legal, and within the competence of the government, many Christians and churches actually supported it. Viktor Frankl, who of course famously survived the camps and was a physician himself, said this: the gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of the theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or blood and soil, as they said. I'm sure that the gas chambers were ultimately prepared not by some ministry in Berlin, but rather in the lecture halls of universities and of scientists and philosophers. Famously, the Lutheran pastor, as you recall, had said this in Germany. They first came for the communists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a communist. They came for the Jews. I didn't speak out. I wasn't a Jew. Then the trade unionists. Then they came for the Catholics. I didn't speak out because I was Protestant. By the time they came for me, there was no one left to speak out. Again, not unlike the situation today. How many churches in groups are actively opposing the culture of death today? There's probably as many supporting it, sadly. So, quickly in Australia, Peter Singer, you might know of, he used to be at Monash University for many years. Philosopher, ethicist, actually wrote the article on ethics for the Encyclopedia Britannica. Some years ago, he shifted to Princeton University in America, but he's one fully into this, and of course he's taught tens of thousands of students, wrote countless books, influencing so many. He has said that people who have consciousness or awareness, various functional capabilities, can be said to be persons, but others, including the unborn and the newborn, don't have this functionality. Therefore, he's even argued not just for abortion and euthanasia, but infanticide as well. One of his famous books, Not All Members of the Species Homo sapiens are persons, and not all persons are members of the species Homo sapiens. So he thinks some of the higher apes and animals have a greater right to live than many human beings. Species membership is not morally relevant if you compare a dog or a pig to a severely defective infant. Well, then clearly we should run with the dog or the pig. Now, by the way, when I was with the Australian Family Association some years ago, and Singer was still here in Australia. He ran as a candidate for the Greens for the Senate in Australia. So that should tell you straight away. If any of you are yet thinking of voting for the Greens, you better rethink. But anyways, Singer was running. He didn't get in, thankfully. But I went through a bunch of his books, and I took 4 quotations. Here's some of them, and some more. I gathered these 4. We took out a quarter-page ad in the Australian newspaper before the election, and we simply had these 4 quotes that I gathered. I said, this is what you're voting for if you vote for Peter Singer. As I say, he didn't make it in, but his own words could, hopefully for any thinking moral person, could end his chances. And by the way, that's what Trump has to do next week in the debate. Simply quote Kamala's words. Everything she said, right, is enough to condemn her. So Trump doesn't have to do anything. He just quotes what Wallace, right? Remember Tim Wallace we did have feminine products in boys' bathrooms back in Minnesota. Wanted to have trans operations on children without informing the parents. These are radical Democrats. And so again, let their own words condemn them. John Coulter was another Democrat, which was probably as radical of a minor party as the Greens were back then. He, at one point, told an audience that no Australian family, Kathy will be in bad shape here, as probably many others, no family should have more than 2 kids. Later on, Bill Hayden, some of you might recall these names, right? Governor General. He talked about unproductive burdens that need to be disencumbered by euthanasia. Tim Flannery, a guy who still gets a big run for, we're all going to die, the climate is, climate alarmism. First that we're all going to freeze from a global cooling, now global warming, and now that's not panning out. So it's, there's one thing after another. He proposed, as a scientist, influential scientist, Australian populations should aim for about 10 million people. Now, what's the population today?
25.
Right? 25, eh? So, what's going to happen to the 15 mil? And how do we get rid of them? And as we always say, Tim, are you going to lead the way by example here? I mean, really, if you're going to talk the talk, you've got to walk the walk. Will you take the first step to help the planet get rid of too many people? Or at least Australia. A Gosford councillor some years ago actually proposed that we could give money to people who are sterilized, and those who choose to have no children should be given a $50,000 community service award. So this is not theoretical. This is not, well, that Sanger was bad news, Hillary's bad news. This is all your country, Australia. So what do as we quickly finish here? We got to fight back, obviously. Chesterton, one of my favorites, should be yours, wrote a whole book, right, on eugenics. As discussed, it means the control of some men over the marriage and unmarriage of others, and probably means the control of the few over the marriage and unmarriage of the many. 1922, his book came out. You can still get it. I've got a copy. I'm quite well. I've written it up often on my website. CultureWatch, by the way, I have a bunch of pamphlets somewhere, I think out in the back, for CultureWatch. So if you like what you hear, grab a pamphlet, and that'll take you to my articles on Chesterton. I've got, 150 articles on abortion, 100 plus on euthanasia. I've got many on the eugenics movement. So if you want all this information, plus its documentation, you'll get most of it on my website or in my books on abortion, euthanasia, and so on. Eugenics, Chesterton said, seems to be quite as barbarous as cannibalism, right? If we can tell people who and how they should mate, just like the animals, well, maybe we can tell people how to cook or not cook people, just like the beasts. If a citizen may not settle what is to happen to his living body, why should he be allowed to be fastidious about what happens to his dead body? Chesterton always was good with his words. The whole point of the eugenic pseudo-scientific theories is that they are to be applied wholesale by some more sweeping and generalizing money power than the individual husband or wife. It asserts that all men must be so stupid that they cannot manage their own affairs, or so clever that they can manage other people's. One last one, I think. The eugenics professor may or may not succeed in choosing the baby's parents. It is quite certain that he cannot succeed in choosing his own parents. All his thoughts, including his eugenic thoughts, are by the very principle of those thoughts flowing from a doubtful or tainted source. In short, we should need a perfectly wise man to do the thing at all. And if he were a wise man, he would not do it. So a lot of good lines from Chesterton. Another one you should know of, right, his Protestant counterpart, if you will, C.S. Lewis, wrote a number of very important books. You really should have these, just like you should have Chesterton's works. That Hideous Strength, the third of his three-part space trilogy. The Abolition of Man, a very important short book, and an even shorter essay, The Weight of Glory. Just quickly, some of his quotes, they're all on my website. If at any one age we attain, either by eugenics or whatever, the ability to make our descendants the way we want them to be, well, what it's really going to do is make some people weaker and not stronger. Man's conquest of nature, if the dreams of these planners are realized, means the rule of a few hundreds of men over billions of other men. There won't be an increase on power on man's side. Every new power won will be by some over the rest. And he had an essay 47 on vivisection. Once the old Christian idea of a total difference between man and beast is lost, there is no argument. The animal experiments that we're so happy to do, we can now perform on human beings. If we cut up animals, it will be logical to cut up imbeciles, criminals, and so on. The Weight of Glory, one of his most important essays, there are no ordinary people. You have neither talked to a mere mortal, never talked. Cultures, arts, civilizations, they come and go, but every person you meet is an eternal being, right? The people we joke with, work with, snub, exploit, they're going to live forever, right? So the point, the point clear. The checkout chick at Kohl's or Woolies, you might go there later today and get groceries. That person you're looking at, even if she fumbles and gives you the wrong change or whatever, that person, Lewis is saying, is made in God's image, is going to live forever somewhere. So we should treat every person we come into contact with this sense of, wow, this is somebody who has inherent dignity and respect. Peter Hitchens, by the way, you might know his brother, Christopher Hitchens, died of cancer, an arch-atheist, one of the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse, right, along with Dawkins. Peter Hitchens is a Christian. He said this: abortion is the only event that modern liberals think too violent to be portrayed on TV. It's not because they're prudish, it's because if people knew what abortion really looked like, that would be the end of the practice, right? So you don't get pictures or presentations of what happens in the abortion bill. Plenty of scriptures, right? Lead those who are being taken to the slaughter away from the slaughterer. Speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. D.L. Moody, an American pastor from Chicago. I am the only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. And that which I can do, by the grace of God, I will do. Good application for us in the fight for life. I like this one. I speak often. You know, I got a friendly crew here. Sometimes I speak with atheists or Muslims or homosexuals or angry single mothers who've had lots of abortions. So I always apply this, at least to myself. Speak the truth, even if your voice shakes, right? We're all called to do it. By the way, use the social media. Use things like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram to share truth. So that's me, that's my website, that's what I do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. That was great. Would anyone like to ask a question Bill's way?
Thank you very much for your talk. Something that's been a bit puzzling to me is slightly different from what you talked about, is the connection between labor governance and abortion and gender identity. In the 50s and 60s, labor governance was more about workers' conditions and the emancipation of women.
Yeah.
But they shifted in the 90s and so on to suddenly picking up this new thing about abortion and gender identity and pushing it.
Yeah.
Now, what's the connection? What's the political push for them to be able to run a political party? And this seems to have no connection, but yet they keep on doing it. Can you just throw some light on that, please?
Very good question indeed. Thank you very much. And this, by the way, is true in much of the West, certainly in America, like Australia. Well, the simple answer is the whole landscape, politically and culturally, has moved to the radical secular left, right? So what was once a centrist so-called party is now a leftist party, and the parties of the left are now hardcore left, and sadly, even some of the conservative parties are now, you know, at best middle of the road and a bit iffy. So you certainly find that in America, right? Kamala is further to the left than Joe Biden. Tim Walz, her running mate, is further to the left than Kamala, right? This is the most radical, hardcore left-wing ticket in American presidential history. Everything is shifted to the left. And it's the same here, right? What Albo's doing with his trans policies, his DEI, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. You name the radical policy, including abortion on demand. These guys are up to their ears in it. Now, again, go back not too long ago, even Bob Hawke, right? Or some of the other labor leaders were, you could say, kind of genuinely moderate. They were not hardcore radicals. But the current crop of labor today, just like the current crop of Dems in America, they are hardcore radicals. So as you rightly pointed out, what used to be parties of the working class are now parties of what? Inner city elites, right? Pushing the woke identity, politics, the agendas of radical, secular radicalism. Abortion on demand would be one obvious thing, but the idea you can wake up a guy and tomorrow you can say, oh, I'm actually a woman. So, by the way, you saw in the Paris Olympics this whole thing, right? Two things. One, the opening ceremony, a deliberate mock and attack on Christ and the Last Supper. And then you had men in the boxing ring, right, beating up women, all fully supported by the radical left parties of today. And by the way, I'm on Facebook, you might want to join me. I pointed out both of these things and how satanic they were. And I actually had a lot of Christians attacking me, right? Oh, no, the opening ceremony, it had nothing to do with, Christianity. Absolute idiots. And oh no, this guy, he's not a guy, he's a woman. It's on his passport. So, so you're going to get as much flack from other num-num Christians as you are from the pagans, I hate to say it. But yeah, your point is perfectly right. The party of the working class is now the party of the inner city elites, right? The latte sipping, the Chardonnay sipping socialists in the inner cities who have no idea, well, most of them have never worked a day in their life, right? They've gone to university, into the labor unions, into politics. They've never worked for a living. So they don't know about what real labor is. Who was it? Kim Beazley Sr. had a very famous line long ago in Perth, I believe. What did he say? Something about I'm sick of today's Labour Party. The party that was once the cream of the crop of the working class, right? How did he put it? Is now the dregs of the intelligentsia, the elites and the intelligentsia. So he was, this is like 30 years ago when he said that. He was exactly right. So the whole thing is shifted far left. Guess who today is championing the workers? Hate to say it, it's Peter Dutton in Australia. It's Donald Trump in America. So if you're still, back 50 years ago, well, I'm in favor of the working class. Well, you probably shouldn't be in favor of the Labour Party today or the Democrats in America, because they are no longer the party of the working class. They're the party of the elites who want to push their narrow ideology on every one of you, and it's a bad ideology. Yep, got a few other questions. I'll let you come and state them.
Thank you, Bill. I know you made mention of the fact that in Hollywood, they don't highlight the abortions. It's interesting, one observation I've made in recent times is when it comes to storylines, whenever there's a story about an unexpected pregnancy or whatever, the natural is to carry out the pregnancy and to have it to term, because it makes for great drama, particularly when it creates tension between characters on the show. Now, given that platform, it's funny that Hollywood itself pushes abortion, but when it gets to actual covering storylines, it doesn't go down the abortion route. In fact, it does show when people lose children in the womb, that it's a sad thing. Why don't you think they use that opportunity, given, or why they divert to the natural, pregnancy?
Thanks again for that. Well, you know, the Hollywood agenda is radical left, secular left. Very few conservatives, Christians at all in Hollywood. Although we're seeing a bit of a renaissance, if you will. By the way, there's a brand new film out. What is it? Dennis Quaid, is that the one?
Reagan.
Reagan. Which, by the way, all the critics hate it, right? 20% rating. The audiences love it, 98% rating, right? So once again, the divide between the critics and the ordinary person. So I assume Ronald Reagan's story will be coming here soon enough in the theaters, so go and see it. But we've had a number of important ones of late. So there's a few, but yeah, obviously the pro-abort crowd is not going to, A, show you what goes on in abortion, because it simply turn off too many people. And, well, you know, all the heroes and heroines of our films today, right, often single women, right, childless, you know, I can do it all, we don't need men. So there's the whole feminist ideology being promoted. So it's pretty obvious that we're not going to get much of Hollywood help in telling us what, you know, the real life issues are about.
Just quickly, getting back to what Andrew was saying, they weren't hiding it.
Yeah.
Netflix actually had a movie, I think about 2 years ago. Yeah, they had a movie about 2 years ago about, it was like a buddy movie, a road trip movie, where one girl found out that she was pregnant, and so they decided to go have an adventure and go on a road trip to Mexico to get an abortion.
Okay.
And that was the end of the film, so they have come out a little bit and showed it, but more on Netflix.
Well,
So that's
yeah, thanks for that. And well, we got a few others. Who do we want to run with? Kathy, I'll let you. I don't know how much time we have.
We've got some time because our next speaker hasn't arrived.
Okay. Well, that
But it just might be easier if they come up.
yeah.
here rather
Oh, well.
than taking them over.
Suffering
Just away from the seat of this. Don't stand in front of this.
Yeah. Suffering a bit with Alzheimer's, but I want to thank you very much for all the hard work you've done for such a long time in this area, and your writings, I think we all would appreciate so much what you've given us working, and I want to tell you about the Virgin Mary. At one stage, it's in the handbook of the Virgin Mary that pro-life work isn't part of the, this is Frank Duff saying this. Frank Duff certainly would be in heaven, but he made a mistake there, and we complained about it to Senatus, and they sent back and said, no, it's not. To be involved against abortion is not work for the Legion Mary. And we, Richard Grant, who you know well, him and I, he's the intelligence, he put it all together and sent it back over to the authorities in the Legion Mary, and said, get your spiritual director to approve this. And the answer came direct. Not only is it the work of every legioner, it is the work of every single human being to stand up against take the life of unborn children. I thank you for doing that.
It shows we can make a difference.
Well, thank you for your question. It was more of a statement, sorry, because I work in the construction industry.
Yep.
I work in the CFMU, and I'm starting to go to a lot of the union meetings now and a lot of the other ones, and I see a lot of the kids who identify as leftists and Marxists and all the communist things. Because originally they went up and they got up and they're very passionate, very angry, but it's all misdirected and they don't really know what they're doing exactly. So I said, there's not, and like you said, there's not many people with construction experience. They're either just all professional, useful idiots, to put it nicely. And they said a lot of things that were very. It's like watching history repeat itself. It's like they say things like, Croatian, and grew up in Yugoslavia, for example, and they say things like, "Oh, that was not real communism," and it's like, "Oh, okay, are you joking, or is that like an ironic thing?" And it's So I got up and I spoke about my faith and my journey and how Catholic social teaching is similar to leftist themes, but in the correct way. I put it in a more secular, still in line with our teaching. And they actually got up and clapped, and I was like, what's going on here? And it's, I don't even think it's like that saying that says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I believe they don't even know, we're at the stage where they don't even know what they're doing is causing whatever they don't know the history.
Thanks very much indeed. Yeah, I mean, we could spend a bit of time there, right? A lot of the original labour unions did begin with Christian origins, distinctly Christian, but we've kind of shifted in them.
I might not need the microphone. I'm going to, it might be a bit silly, and I'm preaching to the converted, I know, but Catholic schools, what are they? What are our Catholic schools? Why aren't our leaders listening? Why aren't parents taking up the challenge to be faithful to the teachings? Is it because the parents don't know the teachings and are breeding ignorant children? Sorry, I don't mean that in an offensive way. But where are our Catholic schools? My son is almost disillusioned with Catholic and what has happened to him and what he has witnessed happen to me in my parish. What do we do? How do we, as committed Catholics, stand to make a difference?
Good question.
Thanks very much, Bill. I'm one of the original parishioners of St Phillip's here, going back almost 60 years now. And just in response to that last question, St Phillip's is proposed to be the first parish in Victoria to advance a Catholic liberal arts education in the primary school. I don't know how widely that proposal has been promoted, but it's certainly very much current, and for people who are interested, they should pursue that with the parish. But the main thing two other things, the comment about Our Lady's position on the question of those who are opposing abortion. I'm currently reading a book that was written by a Frenchman only 2 years ago named Xavier Reyes Ayral. That's R-E-Y-E-S -A-Y-R-A-L. The title of the book is Revelations, and the subtitle is The Hidden Prophecies of Our Lady. Over the past couple of centuries, I suppose. And those prophecies become increasingly serious and dire about the deterioration of the moral state of the world and the need for chastisement. And I'd recommend that any who wish to pursue that could get hold of the book. It's the hard copy of the book is something like $70, but there's a $6 or $6 or $7 ebook that's available through the Amazon Kindle and the other books of clients, called Revelations by Xavier Reyes Ayral. And in it, amongst other things, Our Lady mentions the
incidents of abortion as being one of the things that really needs to be attended to. Thanks very much.
Thank you for that.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll just have a 10-minute break.
I just want to ask, how much should, as Australians, how much should we be worried about offending people and having legal proceedings against us, such as Burner Game or as in Queensland, and how much of an issue has that ever been for you? Do you get threats and...
Very good question, and yes, something I can certainly answer on various levels. Yeah, I've had homosexual activists take me before the courts, trying to get me to recant, confess, repent, whatever, which I haven't done, by the way. And of course, many others. Lyle Sheldon Ryan had the drag queens going after him, so many people. I'd like to mention a few quick stories here, if I can keep it quick. Well, look, a couple of parts. One, the most loving, kind, compassionate, merciful human being to walk the planet. I guess you know who I refer to. He was offending people all the time, 2,000 years ago, right? Every time you read the Gospels, right? The crowds were divided because of him. Or, after this, the disciples no longer walked with him. They hated the stuff he was saying. So, and he was loving, he was kind, he spoke truth in love, and yet they crucified him. So, as you know, the servant is not above the master. If you think you're going to make it through this world and have nobody disliking you or being offended, you might have to ask, am I a real follower of Jesus Christ, right? Truth always offends. Sure, we don't go out of our way to be offensive. We try to be tactful, wise, careful, and so on. But whenever you speak truth to a world that hates truth, guess what? They won't like it at all, and you will get attacked. So yeah, I've been, taken to courts and so on. There is one Christian group, the Human Rights Law Association, which is very good. And let me finish with this story because it really is personal. I used to have a great doctor, fantastic GP, right? Looked after my needs. I'll tell you how it happened. First of all, my wife had gone to this clinic, a bunch of doctors, right? This Asian doctor heard my wife's name, my late wife. Oh, do you know Bill Muehlenberg? He said. And she said, yeah, he's my husband. And he got all excited. Oh, I love Bill. I love his work. So, needless to say, I started going and made him my doctor. He's a Christian man, Asian fellow, pro-life, wonderful guy, young Asian with 2 kids and a wife. However, he is no longer my doctor. Something happened quite terrible. And you say, well, what? Did he abuse a patient? Did he steal funds from the clinic? No, something much worse. He actually posted comments on my website, CultureWatch, and on his own Facebook page. Things like, every child deserves a mother and a father. Things like, marriage is between a man and a woman. Things like, there are not 600 genders, there's only 2. Things like, it's not good to kill babies in the womb. For simply saying those things in his own time, on his own private Facebook page or on my CultureWatch page, the medical board, homosexual complained, right? None of his patients complained. They all loved him. I loved him. But a homosexual activist complained, and the Victorian Medical Board kicked him out of his job 5 years ago. So now he's had to find new work to feed his family. So imagine how many years of training in school do you go so you can become a doctor? He's lost it all. So anyways, HRLA has just helped him a couple of weeks ago. Finally, after 5 years, they had a big court hearing in the city. The outcome is still to be determined, but there, Jareth Koch, my doctor, he said, hey, I'm a Christian, I'm pro-life, I'm not ashamed of that, but why my private opinions? Nobody's ever complained, all my patients love me. So pray for Jared, pray that a good outcome comes about all this. There's a lot of these guys. There's Dr. Hobart, I think, in Tassie, as you mentioned, Bernard Gaynor. There's so many people, either doctors or others, who are losing their jobs. Yeah, Dave Pello Kathy's been, in jail over the years? Once. That's more than most of us. For standing outside an abortion clinic, right? So she knows all about it. Dave Pello simply said, I'm not keen on the, welcome to country, Dreamtime spirituality ceremonies. He says, I'm not going to do it. A guy complained, so he was dragged before the Queensland Discrimination Board. So yeah, it's happening all the time. So you got to ask, well, look, sure, I got a family to feed, and you think about those things, but I think we're getting to the place where we have to say, well, if I do end up in jail, is God able to look after my family, right? If I do speak truth on the social media and I, lose my job, whatever, we really are at the place where we have to ask these questions. Are we willing to stand for truth, even if it really means some pretty serious repercussions? And, even willing to lose government funding as a school or as a parish or a church, right? If the government's going to tie your hands behind your back in terms of what you can teach or who you can hire, right? So, even asking, should we forget about government funding altogether and trust God for the first time in our lives? I could go on, but you get the gist.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you. Thanks so much, Bill. We really appreciate everything you've done and having you here today. Thank you. God bless you. Our next speaker is Father Denton, and he's been held up doing priestly things. So I think we might just have a 5 or 10 minute break while we wait for him to arrive. If you'd like to use the bathroom or have another coffee. So the toilets are just over to